Comforter, the Spirit of truth, who art everywhere and fillest all things, treasury of blessings, and giver of life, come and abide in us, and cleanse us from every impurity, and save our souls, O good one.
In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Glory to Jesus Christ.
Glory forever.
Okay, well, and I'll say this for anybody who may eventually watch this on YouTube. I now have learned a lesson not to schedule adult ed anywhere near Penn State football games. But for those who are here, wherever two or three are gathered together in the name of Christ, He promises to be with them. So let's get ready and learn here. So we've got today on tap we have Christianity and abortion, and I've subtitled the talk "Primitive Unity and Contemporary Challenges." And I want to start by looking at one of the contemporary challenges, which is, I've brought up in the person of the Reverend Catherine Ragsdale here. Now she is a highly placed, I think now retired, Episcopalian priest, she would call herself. And she was the president of Episcopal Divinity School in New York City. And she is like many Episcopalian priests and bishops, she would consider herself an activist, and in her case that's very, very true, for abortion. And in fact, by her understanding, abortion is a universally positive thing. Right? In whatever circumstance, for whatever reason, I guess I would qualify by saying if the mother wants it, then it's not just a neutral thing, it's not just like something unfortunate that has to happen, but it's actually a positive. In fact, one of her spiritual successors, not denominationally related, just I believe earlier this year decided to found a church based around abortion. So I want to read part of one of her speeches to kind of set the context in which we live a little bit now, and some of the contemporary division amongst those who self-identify as Christians on the subject of abortion. So she's giving a speech, and she says, "Finally, the last sign I want to identify relates to my fellow clergy. Too often those who support us can be heard talking about abortion as a tragedy. Let's be very clear about this. When a woman finds herself pregnant due to violence and chooses an abortion, it is the violence that is the tragedy. The abortion is a blessing. When a woman finds that the fetus she carries has anomalies incompatible with life and will not live, and that she requires an abortion, often a late-term abortion, to protect her life, her health, or her fertility, it is the shattering of her hopes and dreams for that pregnancy that is the tragedy. The abortion is a blessing. When a woman wants a child but can't afford one because she hasn't the education necessary for a sustainable job, or access to health care, or daycare, or adequate food, it is the abysmal priorities of our nation, the lack of social supports, the absence of justice that are tragedies. The abortion is a blessing. And when a woman becomes pregnant within a loving, supportive, respectful relationship, has every option open to her, decides she does not wish to bear a child, and has access to a safe, affordable abortion, there is not a tragedy in sight, only blessing. The ability to enjoy God's good gift of sexuality without compromising one's education, life's work, or ability to put to use God's gifts and calling is simply blessing." These are two things I want you please to remember. Abortion is a blessing and our work is not done. Let me hear you say it. Abortion is a blessing and our work is not done. Abortion is a blessing and our work is not done. Abortion is a blessing and our work is not done. I want to thank all of you who protect this blessing. You are heroes. In my eyes, you are saints. the escorts and activists, the lobbyists and clinic defenders, all of you, she talks about healthcare providers and whatnot, you are engaged in a holy work. Now that is that position on abortion, which actually I think is fairly reflective of a lot of society's viewpoint on abortion. Or at the very least, it's sort of a necessary evil, which is kind of good, right? Like it's something kind of ugly, but it's good that it's there to preserve liberty for a mother, or whatever the case may be. But in the case of somebody like Ragsdale, she is way more. You want to be a modern day saint? Abort babies. I mean, that's her words.
Does she have any children?
She's a lesbian and is in a married so-called relationship. So no, this isn't her problem actually. But boy, does she care a lot about it. Okay, so obviously this is not the normative view of Christianity of Christianity broadly in the 21st century. And since we are Orthodox Christians, here's a statement, sort of an authoritative, published statement from a very important document called The Social Concept of the Russian Orthodox Church. And this is sort of the teaching of the Moscow Synod on the issue of abortion. And so they say, since the ancient time, the Church has viewed deliberate abortion as a grave sin. The canons equate abortion with murder. Now similarly, the largest Christian body in the world, in its official statement on the matter in its catechism, right, so the Catechism of the Roman Catholic Church, says, since the 1st century, the Church has affirmed the moral evil of every procured abortion. So on the one hand, we have people who claim to be Christians saying this is good and holy, a holy, blessed saint-making. And on the other hand, we have Christians who are saying this is grave evil and grave sin and moral evil, right? So one thing I think that is definitely referenced in those two statements, the Catholic and the Orthodox, is that abortion is not a new issue. So many people erroneously believe that abortion was something that really didn't exist before the 20th century. Like people hadn't really thought of it, it's some kind of like technological development that happened maybe in the 19th century, maybe in the 20th century. But we can do sort of this family planning now through abortion. And so for this reason, they're under the mistaken impression that the ancient world did not practice abortion and had no conception of it. But in fact, abortion and infanticide were widely practiced in the Hellenistic and Roman worlds, and abortion was legal under Roman law. So you may be asking yourself, what does abortion look like in the 1st century? Well, I mean, the basics of it are the same as today. Is it remotely as safe for the woman? Absolutely not. No question, not even close. But I would also point out that basically nothing to do with medicine was as safe for anybody, not even close in the 1st century, right? But abortion in the 1st century, it can be mechanical. I mean, it can be really brutish. It can be sort of tie a girdle with a tightener around a woman's stomach and kind of force a birth to occur. It can involve invasion past the cervix with specialized surgical tools, dismemberment and extraction. It can involve poisoning, right? It can involve what we would call oral abortifacient contraceptive kind of thing, right? That too. But anyway, point being that there are lots of methods, and again, many of them very dangerous. Like the poisoning method is very typically we give the woman a low dose of a poison that will kill an adult, right? And the idea is it kills the baby, but she lives. Not a very dangerous thing to do, right? Frankly, abortion in the first century, from the best we can tell, I mean, there are no like opinion polls from first century AD, but it seems to have enjoyed widespread public support and even philosophical support. But before I turn to ancient philosophy, Greek thought, Roman thought, and Jewish thought on what abortion is, I want to turn to the modern again for just a second and talk about the question of personhood. So in contemporary discourse, I think it's fair to say that the religious, legal, or ethical legitimacy of abortion is intimately tied, in many cases hinges on the concept of personhood. So if a fetus should, from the beginning or at any point, be considered a person, then generally our culture is in agreement that killing this person is unethical, should be illegal, from a religious perspective, should be considered immoral or sinful, and this kind of thing, right? Actually, interestingly enough, what we're about to learn is that is not true of antiquity, right? So in antiquity, you have two philosophical views of the personhood of a fetus. The first is that it's a separate individual human being, probably from conception, right? So this is a view that's expressed, for instance, by Plato or Aristotle. The secondary view would be that it's essentially like a body part. It's a part of its mother until its first breath because it can't live independently. And we see these two things are clashing in the modern day, are they not? These two questions. I think biologically, with modern genetics and everything, like biologically you can say this is a separate organism, right? But there are still lots of people, obviously, that are going to say, well, it's inextricably attached to its mother's womb and therefore can't be considered certainly a separate person, right? Okay, so interestingly enough, in the ancient world, there is no direct tie between the idea of the personhood of a fetus and society's moral evaluation of abortion. And I give you the contrasting examples here. So Plato and Aristotle, as I said, taught that abortion is the killing of a human being. But because Plato and Aristotle are not inheritors of the law of Moses or of Christian ethics, they don't think that putting human beings to death for various, they would call them important reasons, is bad, right? So they have a mentality that says, well, if society finds it needful or appropriate or convenient to kill, various classes of people, then they can do that. In contrast, then, we've got the Stoics, who teach that the fetus is not a human being, but many of the Stoics would say that it is something deeply unethical, unnatural, like perverse. Like for a mother to want to end the life of her own child, there's something really twisted and wrong about this. So there's no tie there necessarily between personhood and the legitimacy of abortion in the ancient world. So the general Roman legal consensus, anyway, seems to have been that a fetus is not a human person, that a fetus is the property of the paterfamilias, and this would get people riled in the modern world, right? And that abortion is morally permissible with the consent of the paterfamilias. So this is probably not me. It's probably my dad. So, the likelihood is, right, that I don't have neither my wife nor I would have the ability to legally to instigate and sort of authorize an abortion, right? But whoever the patriarchal head of the family, so probably my dad, would be able to say, Ignatius, you have too many children, next one, no way, right? I think, if we look at this in terms of modernity, really we can say that modern American law has tended in the direction of seeing, for a time, a fetus as not a human person, and the fetus is the property of the mother, right? Like as a different owner, but still, kind of property, right? Okay, so Hellenistic Judaism. In Hellenistic Judaism, deliberate abortion is forbidden. After all, God gives the commandment, be fruitful and multiply, and the Jews in antiquity are into multiplying, right? However, they have an exception, sort of a broadly observed exception for cases of medical necessity to save the life of the mother. And I would say, actually, the Jewish legal reasoning on this is brilliant, right? I think it's good morning. I think Jewish legal reasoning on abortion in cases of medical necessity is absolutely brilliant. So the argument that they make is that the woman should be viewed as being attacked by another person, right? And so just as it would be acceptable to use deadly force to stop a potentially deadly attack on another person, it is lawful in this Jewish conception to use deadly force to stop an infant from killing the mother, right? So but anyway, that is kind of a minority. Generally speaking, Hellenistic Judaism doesn't like abortion. And perhaps predictably, if you know the law of Moses, most Jewish discussions of abortion involved questions surrounding of what to do with someone who attacks a woman or accidentally harms a woman, causing a miscarriage. And the question here. So this by the way, this line is not about deliberately procured abortion, but this is by, like, nasty boyfriend comes and beats her up. Maybe he intends to kill the baby, but comes and beats her up. The baby is aborted, and the question is, how do we then treat nasty boyfriend? Okay, like within the Jewish understanding of law, like, you've committed assault. Okay, you're bad. You've committed assault. But have you committed property damage because this is not a person, or have you committed murder? Or in what, like, some Jewish equivalent of, like, involuntary manslaughter. So the question then, so the Jews are very concerned then with the question of to what degree do we punish, right, for this particular offense. It makes you wonder, how often does this come up? And you hope it's not very often, but you really don't know. So anyway, when we're talking about Hellenistic Judaism, we basically end up with three schools on the question of personhood. So you've got the majority Palestinian school that will side with the Stoics or with Roman law and say that the fetus is part of its mother. And therefore, provoking a miscarriage, is a bad thing. The boyfriend needs to be punished. The husband needs to be punished. Whoever, the other woman who attacks her and causes this needs to be punished. But it should be treated like bodily mutilation. Like, the punishment should be like, oh my gosh, you knocked out some of her teeth, or oh my gosh, you cut off her finger, or whatever the case might be. So it's not something that's going to provoke, like, for instance, a death penalty. Okay, then you've got the Alexandrian school that wants to distinguish between early pregnancy and late pregnancy. So the Alexandrian school would say that destroying what they called an unformed fetus is wrong and punishable by a fine, but it's not murder, right? But once you have a formed fetus, and their definition definitely means one having recognizable limbs. Like this, nobody's going to mistake this for a clump of cells. Like, this is a baby with arms and legs and a head. But destroying a formed fetus in the Alexandrian understanding is murder and should be punishable by death. And finally, there is the minority Palestinian school, so the minority rabbinic Palestinian school, which would argue that a fetus is an ensouled person from conception, or even possibly from slightly before conception, interestingly enough. Like conception hasn't quite happened, but God kind of like has a soul hanging out in the vicinity ready to go. Conception hasn't happened. But within that standpoint, then destroying the child is murder. regardless of what stage the abortion occurs at. Okay, so Christian scripture. So we're going to turn to Christianity, and we're going to see actually that Christianity has a very concrete and we could say kind of hard line view on abortion. And I would say, you know, when we're thinking about Judaism, it's very much in line with the views of the minority Palestinian school, sans, in most cases, speculation on whether or not the soul is present before the moment of conception. However, when we talk about this is your slide, Richard. This is the one for you.
Thank you.
When we talk about Christian scripture and abortion, so abortion is not something that is overtly talked about in the scriptures. You know, there's a lot of things within Christian teaching and ethics. Sorry, Protestants who may be watching, but there are a lot of things about Christian teaching and ethics that are not present in an open and uncontestable way in the scriptures. So it's likely that abortion is being alluded to in various places in the New Testament, because you know, throughout the New Testament condemns pharmacists and those who use their products. Richard?
I'm retired.
I'll see you in confession. However, I mean, you know, just so we are clear for Mr. Nakels here, you are not what is being condemned when the New Testament condemns pharmakia, right? So what's going on in the pharmacy, like with pharmacists and pharmakia in the New Testament, runs the gamut. So the word, even in regular Greek, shades negative, right? Whereas I would say in modern English, when we talk about someone being a pharmacist, this is a positive thing, right? Like, oh, this is someone who's going to help me. Like, you know, I've got a bacterial infection, Richard, you're going to save me, maybe even save my life, right? In the time of the New Testament, you know, pharmakia involves quackery. It involves magic and witchcraft. You know, you'd imagine like potions, right? Double, toil and trouble. Yeah. Double toil and trouble. You know, so it involves magic. It involves unsavory, illicit actions. You know, it involves people that develop poisons for you to kill your enemy or your spouse or whoever you feel. You know, it involves drugs and drug dealers. You know, you know, and also it, as part of this, it refers to those who create and administer abortifacient potions, right, or compounds. As I said, in many places, you know, the New Testament throws, you know, like into these lists of, you know, people that are bad. You know, somewhere in the middle is people that practice pharmakia, right? And again, this doesn't mean the New Testament is against like medicine, drugs, illicit drugs, not like hallucinogenic, whatever. But it doesn't mean that the New Testament is against that kind of thing, not at all. But it is against witchcraft and magic and poisoning and possibly abortion. But also, when we're dealing with the New Testament, you know, there is a view of pre-birth personhood that can be inferred from the scriptures, and this is especially the case in Luke 1:44. Because here we have, you know, we see the icon of Mary greeting St. Elizabeth, and Elizabeth tells her, "Behold, when the voice of your greeting came to my ears, the babe in my womb leaped for joy." And so, you know, the fathers certainly will spin with this, you know, when discussing abortion and say, you know, John the Baptist, you know, has some kind of personal consciousness while he's in the womb because he can rejoice at the presence of the Lord, right? But Scripture is, admittedly, rather silent on the question of abortion. So what does early Christianity say about abortion? Well, early Christianity, we have, you know, sort of in the post-scriptural early Christian writings, we have absolutely unqualified universal opposition to abortion. Like, this is not a question. The earliest known Christian reference to abortion directly is in the Didache. It's the Didache 2:2, which I have quoted on the screen there. And it refers to the unborn person as a child, right? Which is something that if you're kind of directing in the body part category, you might not want to do. And it refers to taking its life specifically as murder. And it uses the Greek word for murder and not the Greek word for killing or slaughtering or something like that. Which I don't know, perhaps it can, perhaps that word can in limited circumstances be used, by like sort of a rhetorician, to say like, he murdered those animals. Or who are we playing today here? What game is Penn State playing? I don't know, we murdered them, something like that, right? Well, actually no, because they're persons. So, even if we're metaphorically murdering them, they're still persons. But anyway, the idea that the Greek is using the word murder is implying the personhood of the fetus because, just typically in the Greek language, overwhelmingly, the word that's used is going to describe killing a human being, killing a man, killing a person. And I don't know if there are exceptions to that. So, such sentiments as what we find in the Didache are widespread and uncontested in early Christian literature. So for instance, here we have Tertullian from the turn of the 3rd century. And he writes, to hinder a birth, by which he means to abort a baby, to hinder a birth is merely a speedier man killing. Nor does it matter whether you take away a life that is born or destroy one that is coming to birth. That is a man which is going to be one. You have the fruit already in the seed. So here we've got a vision of the personhood of even acknowledging that it's sort of an unformed personhood or whatever, but it is already a anthropos. Well, he's writing in Latin, so I don't know what their word, homo? Anyway, I don't know. But it's already a human being. In early Christianity then, we have abortion portrayed as a variant of murder. That's how it's understood, without any real qualification. It brings incredible guilt to all who are willingly involved. And I would say, we do need to understand that in antiquity, much more than today, there is the potential that a woman is taken to a doctor completely against her will, but by the will of the paterfamilias, and an abortion is performed. So, the church would say this woman is a victim here, right? And the wicked parties, the ones who bear the guilt of murder, are the paterfamilias and the doctor, or the pharmacist. So we'll look at some examples of that in some of the early texts here. So you have Athenagoras of Athens, who's writing to the Roman authorities, to the emperor, answering charges, among other things, that Christians are cannibals. And so the charge is essentially that they that Christians will steal babies and cut them up and eat them, and that's why they talk about eating flesh and blood when they celebrate the liturgy, right? So Athenagoras writes to the emperor and the senate, how then, when we do not even look on gladiatorial contests, can we put people to death? And when we say that those women who use drugs to bring on abortion commit murder, and will have to give an account to God for the abortion, on what principle shall we commit murder? For it does not belong to the same person to regard the very fetus in the womb as a created being, and therefore an object of God's care, and when it is passed into life, to kill it. In other words, we don't eat babies, we don't eat small children, we don't kidnap people and eat them. And how can you know that? Because it's our teaching that abortion itself is wrong. But also, just from the standpoint of guilt there, speaking specifically, the women who use drugs to bring on abortion commit murder. Okay, well, let's pass on to Oh, actually, this is another with women. So this is a second century apocalypse. It's a pseudepigraphical document. It's sort of a vision. It's attributed to the Holy Apostle Peter. It's not written by him, but there were some fathers, like in the late 2nd century, early 3rd century, who considered it scriptural, right? So it's not completely without authority, but we also need to take it with a grain of salt, right? So our visionary says in the Apocalypse here, and near the place I saw another straight place, into which the gore and the filth of those who were being punished ran down, and became there as it were a lake. And there sat women having the gore up to their necks, and over against them sat many children who were born to them out of due time. That's a euphemism for abortion, right? Born to them, that's not miscarriage, that's a euphemism for abortion. Crying, and there came forth from them, that is the children, there came forth from them sparks of fire and smote the women in the eyes, and these are the accursed who conceived and caused abortion. So, this is a very, very serious offense in the eyes of early Christianity. And certainly it's not one that is borne by women alone. So for instance, here we have Cyprian of Carthage discussing the character of the schismatic Novatian. May have also been a heretic, I can't remember, but he certainly is a schismatic. And Cyprian has lots of bad things to say about how he treats his extended family and whatnot. But he also comes to a point where he talks about his wife and a time that he beat her. So, regarding Novatian, the womb of his wife was smitten by a blow of his heel. And in the miscarriage that soon followed, the offspring was brought forth, the fruit of a father's murder. And how does he dare to condemn the hands of those who sacrifice, when he himself is more guilty in his feat, by which the son who was about to be born was slain? And by the way, he's condemning the hands of the priests offering the Eucharist, right, as a perverse heretic. But he caused the abortion. He's guilty. Okay. Similarly, Saint Basil the Great. This is considerably later, late 300s. Those two who give drugs causing abortion are murderers themselves. So I would say, a takeaway from this for the modern Orthodox Christian. I don't know, Richard, how pharmacy works now, but if you're required to provide, abortifacients, at this point, I think that's probably a field that a person needs to leave, or fight, one or the other.
The courts have stated that the pharmacist has a right to refuse to dispense it.
Right. Well, that's a good thing. I mean, that's a good thing. Obviously, you can't stop it from going on around you. They're going to leave you and go to somebody else who's going to do it for them. But at the same time, you shouldn't be handing people death-dealing poison. Not intentionally. I'm sure within the realm of pharmacy work, periodically things are prescribed by doctors or whatever that are just end up being wrong. But there's a very different purpose in that. Okay, so abortion amongst early Christians. So, while all early Christians were saints, in one register, not all early Christians were saints. Okay, not all early Christians were saints. And in fact, while it seems like amongst Jews and Christians, and again, it's hard to gauge this kind of thing, but it seems like abortions are rarer amongst Jews and Christians than they are in the general population of the Roman Empire. Intentional abortions definitely did occur amongst early Christians. And so, for instance, we have Origen and Hippolytus and Methodius of Olympus, writing at the end of the 2nd through the 4th centuries, who are all witnessing to the practice of abortion amongst what Origen calls so-called Christians and what Hippolytus calls reputed believers. Interestingly enough, one of the sort of stereotyped kind of episodes that Christian women, like what kind of Christian woman procures an abortion? Generally, she's wealthy. Generally, she's had an affair, and generally, she doesn't want to deal with the results of it. which even in the understanding of the time include things like disforming her figure. You know, okay. But by the early 4th century, where you start to get this sort of canon law discussing discipline in the church, sort of the rise of early canon law, disciplinary canons with severe punishments are established in local synods to address what do you do with people who are, you know, baptized Orthodox Christians who procure abortion. At least one in my research that I found, the Council of Elvira, includes a lifelong excommunication. I mean, and actually it's interesting because it's, you know, similar to how you would treat murderers, child molesters, and those who beat up priests for no discernible reason. You know, so beware. Beware.
We just have to have a good reason, is what I'm hearing.
And catechumens, by the way, actually at the Council of Elvira, if a catechumen procures an abortion, she's to be not excommunicated. She's not to be baptized until her deathbed. So she can be, unlike the Christian, you know, who apparently can never be forgiven. This, by the way, so Elvira, I think, is 309. There is a hyper moralistic, stringent brand of Christianity that's going on in those centuries, which produces, we would say, excesses like this, right? So a for instance would be the fact that so many people at the beginning of the 4th century were not baptized until they were adults, maybe even 30 or 40 years old. Why would you do this? Like, why would you delay baptism for all these years? The answer being that the vision of God that many Christians have developed in the early 4th century is a God who, once you are sacramentally united to Christ, if you commit a grave sin, you're sunk, okay? And so like John Chrysostom, I think Basil the Great himself, I might be wrong about that one, but John Chrysostom certainly is not baptized until he's an adult. But it's not because he needs a believer's baptism in the modern Baptist sense. It's because if he becomes a fornicator as a teenager, he's sunk, right? That's the mentality of the age, and that's and also I understand that the Spanish church, the sort of Iberian church, you know, is habitually over the course of centuries way harsher with things than Christianity in maybe the rest of the empire. So a more typical punishment is a 10-year excommunication, and that seems to end up being kind of the standard. And that puts it amongst the highest ranks of sins. You know, like you denounce the faith, you betray brothers who are then executed by enemies of Christianity, you commit murder, you commit adultery, you know, whatever. This is like a highest rank kind of offense. Another thing I would say just about canons and their implementation, since we're on that subject, is that canons spell out, typically, at least in my understanding of them, kind of a maximum penalty. And then bishops and then their priests as well, by discretion, use discretion about how do we, okay, well, the letter of the law says you did this, so you need to stand in the narthex, not enter the nave, leave when the catechumens leave, and be a penitent for 10 years. It's interesting too, because in this century, penance is very public. Like if you have a penance of excommunication where you've confessed to a thing, but the church has said this thing is so vile that in order to make sure that you're actually penitent before you dare to come back to Holy Communion, you need to not only abstain from communion, but like kind of publicly put yourself in the place. Like I probably have to stand behind the catechumens, like I'm lower than a catechumen because I've received grace and like in a very great way fallen from it.
Can I ask a related question to
Yeah.
that? So like the whole okay, if you're a catechumen, you can't be baptized until your deathbed. Like at that point, would that woman receive Eucharist? Because I'm wondering if kind of the difference in the line is like baptism and Eucharist as like separate sacraments, right? So like, would she still be permitted to take Eucharist like on her deathbed, or?
I would think so.
Okay.
I mean, especially because again, if you're thinking about some of the mentality that produces this, like I mean, baptism remits sins,
Right.
okay?
Yeah.
So, and you know, also, like, when the canons address people whose, like, former lives are, like, as prostitutes or something like that, it's like, repent, believe the gospel, be baptized, and, like, we're not going to, like, excommunicate you, or we're actually going to receive you into the church, you know? It's just, once you're in the church, you know, once you are mystically united to Christ, if you behave in this way, you've sinned horrendously against Christ. And you know, I think probably that there's a line in Hebrews that they would push for this, and I can't remember what it is. You know, like about no sacrifice for sins left, or you know,
But only the fearful expectation of judgment. That one.
that one, yeah. I mean, that would be something that interpretationally people in the 4th century are going to want to kind of push. Okay, so ensoulment and personhood. Generally speaking, we can say that the early fathers either make very terse statements, like what we get in the Didache, about, like, you don't kill a child by abortion, or if they make more expanded statements, they generally just simply assume that if it's conceived, it should be treated as a person. But during the 5th century, we have some notable Christian thinkers, especially Augustine, who revived the old Jewish Alexandrian position on personhood because they're trying to figure out when we should talk about ensoulment, right? And so Augustine wants to say that that the body does not receive a soul until some point after conception, and he's not talking like moments after conception or a day after conception or something like that. He's talking about like something more in the direction of where the Alexandrian Jews. I don't think he uses the language of like discernible hands or feet or anything like that. But he's trying to figure out, you know, what we should do there. So Augustine and anybody who follows him, anybody who's influenced by him in the sort of early middle church there, consider early term abortion to be wrong, morally evil, impermissible, etc. But actually they don't equate it with the murder of a person. Really interesting, because one of the footnotes in Roe v. Wade cites no less than Augustine. Now they skip all the stuff before him that doesn't seem to make any distinction, but they go straight for the one, and this is how they end up. You remember, like, Roe v. Wade does something really bizarre. I mean, like, it kind of sets what is an arbitrary timeline, like this many months, and you can freely abort it in all 50 states. After this many months, well, you know, maybe we need to think about personhood now, right? Okay, so that's that. But let's summarize then early Christianity and abortion. So early Christianity opposes abortion universally and categorically. Everybody says that this is something that is wrong. The overwhelming majority of references would see it as murder without qualification. Again, like Augustine being potentially the alternative there. And the child was always held to be something separate from the mother. Obviously, we have later authors that make a theoretical distinction between early term abortions and later term ones. And the question, when is it a person, is never fully answered by the early church. But it certainly leans to from the moment of conception, right? From the moment of conception. Another thing I would like to say about that is just that you know, the question of when is a human being, when is a baby, when is a fetus, whatever we want to use the language there, when is this a person, it can't be answered in modern terms, right? So, you know, the fathers don't have knowledge about cells and zygotes and implantation and all this kind of stuff. They just don't have that knowledge. But as I said, there's a clear principle that intentionally terminating any pregnancy is wrong, whether for most witnesses it's just murder, you know, without any qualification, or for Augustine it's a sin but not murder to a certain point and then murder afterwards. Right. Okay, So contemporary Orthodox teaching. So where does the Orthodox Church go? Obviously, we do not go with that Episcopal priestess that whose words we read at the beginning there. So where does the Orthodox Church go? Well, one difficulty in Orthodoxy is that while we have certain things that you can say, like this speaks for all of us, kind of univocally or whatever, the fact that our church doesn't have the same view of primacy and consolidation that, say, the Roman Catholic Church does, means that rather than having like one catechism of the Orthodox Christian Church, or one statement on issues like abortion, you've got the statement of the Romanian Church, the statement of the Russian Church, the statement of the Church of Greece, the statement of the Church of Cyprus. Other churches that don't have an official statement. Not because they don't have beliefs, they just don't have one, right? What I'm using anyway, because I actually do believe it's pretty much representative of modern Orthodox teaching on the subject of abortion, is a document called The Social Concept of the Russian Church. And this is sort of the Russian Church's attempt to address various social and technological and modern issues with clear teaching, right? I want to say it's about 20 years old, although I couldn't find a date on when it was developed in my research. Although, obviously you can just do more research. Eventually I could have found it, but how far do you want to go down the rabbit trail is the question. Okay, so first of all, about the social concept of the Russian Church. First of all, it knowingly follows patristic teaching. Like, it would say, and I'll read it again because I know it's been a long time since we encountered this. But it says, since the ancient time, the Church has viewed deliberate abortion as a grave sin. The canons equate abortion with murder. It's knowingly following what the early church does. The other thing that the social concept makes clear at great pains is that the conception of a human being is a gift from God and needs to be treated as a gift from God. For instance, and I'll read this because I think it's just worth our hearing. Right? From the moment of conception, any encroachment, this assessment about abortion being murder is based on the conviction that the conception of a human being is a gift of God. Therefore, from the moment of conception, any encroachment on the life of a future human being is criminal. The psalmist describes the development of the fetus in his mother's womb as God's creative action. God's creative action, right? Thou hast possessed my reins, thou hast covered me in my mother's womb. My substance was not hid from thee. Got a mistranslation here. I was made in secret and curiously wrought in the lowest part of the earth. Thine eyes did see my substance. Then they go on. Job testifies to the same in the words addressed to God. Thine hands have made me and fashioned me together round about. Hast thou not poured me out as milk, and curdled me like cheese? Thou hast clothed me with skin and flesh, and hast fenced me with bones and sinews. Thou hast granted me life and favor, and thy visitation has preserved my spirit. Thou hast brought me forth out of the womb. So again, this is like the child in the womb is an action of God, right? And again, they go on. I formed thee in the belly, and before thou comest out of the womb, I sanctify thee, says the Lord to the prophet Jeremiah. And then they go on from there, leaving the question of conception and the coming into being of a human being as a gift from God. So regarding the question of abortion there, they quote St. Basil, and I love it, Basil writing about a generation before Augustine. And he says, we pay no attention to the subtle distinction as to whether the fetus was formed or unformed. So sorry, this is Basil kind of representing his opinion on what the early church is saying. There is no early term and late term. Again, the social concept following the teaching of the church. Abortion is murder. The church can never bless abortion. Abortion demands a period of penance before one may commune again. It's very interesting. In the social concept, the Russian Church does not define that period of penance, but it's just understood that a priest needs to impose some period of penance. You know, similar to people who get divorced, right? If you get divorced, theoretically, I should impose a penance. Oh, unless you're like just straight up the victim, like, and which does happen potentially. You know, like husband's a sailor and stays in Korea or something like that. Now here's one that I think is interesting, and the Russian Church, in my mind, and you know maybe people will disagree with me, does a good job parsing this issue. So they say that if a woman procures an abortion due to a legitimate threat to her life, she should actually be readmitted to communion readily, right? So no special, because, and I think it really goes back to that, I love that Jewish way of thinking about it. Like, this is a person under mortal assault from another person. Therefore, taking out that person in self-defense is not the same thing as doing murder, right? But that's not the logic they use. In fact, I'll read their it's what they say. You know, in case of a direct threat to the life of a mother if her pregnancy continues, especially if she has other children, I don't like that part, but especially if she has other children, it is recommended to be lenient in pastoral practice. The woman who interrupted pregnancy in this situation shall not be excluded from the Eucharistic communion with the Church, provided that she has fulfilled the canon of penance assigned by the priest who takes her confession. But that's a short-term penance. You know, it's like a actually it's probably canon of, that may actually be a specific item, the canon of repentance, like essentially like reading a canon.
There is a canon of repentance.
Yeah.
So.
Well, unfortunately, that proves your priest has never read it. So hopefully I'm okay at repenting, though. The other things in the social concept, Orthodox medical personnel may not aid or abet or perform abortions. The social concept does not permit exceptions for rape, incest, or detectable fetal abnormalities, right? You know, and I would say they don't give rationale on this, but I would say, you know, the problem is, again, when you're going back to the question of the imminent danger to the life of the mother, you know, you have person assaulting person. You know, but you don't get to just kill someone in life. Like, I mean, you don't get to just like walk up and, you know, especially this is getting publicized. I need to be careful about who I choose for this. You don't get to just walk up to somebody and say, "You're Greek. I don't like where you come from." Bang. You know. So the origin of the child is not something that, you know, obviously, now, I mean, all through this document, compassion is urged. And certainly, you know, I'm riffing, not quoting here, but certainly, you know, when you've got a situation of a woman, you know, who has been raped and conceived in that context, you know, saying, you know, like, if, you know, as your church, we want to help you deal with this. If you can't deal with this, then we need to think about adoption here. You know, like if this child is going to bring you pain instead of joy, it's possible the child may bring you joy. You know, but if the child's going to bring you pain instead of joy, then we need to think about maybe some other arrangement. Also, just to note, you know, kind of modern issues that are not present in antiquity. This is not present in antiquity. The social concept directly condemns sex-selective abortion. It condemns abortifacient contraception. So things that are marketed as contraception, but in fact cause you know, either like sort of embryos not to implant or to dislodge or that kind of thing. Okay. And then finally, also they say in the social concept that the Russian Church is opposed to cloning and fetal organ harvesting, which are also, I guess cloning has not actually happened with humans that we know of yet in the media, who knows. But certainly, okay, and then the last thing I want to talk about here, just in terms of like bringing orthodoxy and abortion into the modern world, is something that, you know, like we can think of it as a new technology. It's actually a very old technology. I mean, it's older than me, right? Older than my own life. And that is the question of in vitro fertilization and what do we make of that. That's not addressed, at least in the section of the social concept of the Russian Church, but the Russian Church does address it in other places. So in vitro fertilization, we all probably know what this is, but it means, in vitro means in glass, and it basically is you remove sort of sperm and egg, probably get a nice solution that allows them to like not die, stick them together in some kind of external to the body fashion. So this is something that could not happen in the first century, right? Like this is a scenario that's just not there. As I've written here, is developed in the 1970s. The first successful birth through IVF was in 1978. But basically, one of the things that goes on with IVF, because this was and continues to be extraordinarily expensive, it's something that typically like the upper middle class or the very wealthy are able to afford and most other people are not. But basically what they do is, because it is very expensive, they're going into a woman's ovaries and they're going to collect a lot of eggs, right? And they're going to fertilize a lot of those eggs because using this method, the odds of implantation, the odds of the zygote then attaching itself to the womb are relatively low, actually. So sometimes, like when you go in for an IVF treatment, they're like they blast like 5 of them at you. They blast a batch of them at you, and the leftovers, as I've said here, are put on ice for potential future use or discarded. What was I going to say? I don't remember. Oh well. So this is kind of a new problem actually for Orthodox theology. So should we consider a fertilized embryo external to the body a person or not? And if so, the question is, are there then any ethical rescue methods that can be undertaken to save the life of an embryo? Occasionally you'll encounter, I don't think there are any Roman Catholics that do this, but occasionally you'll encounter like Protestants who desire to be implanted with other people's embryos that are kind of like out there under glass, as the case may be, in order to save the lives of these supposed persons. So as I said, this is a problem for Orthodox theology. We have different positions represented on the legitimacy. So that in and of itself, the status of embryos is a problem. But the question is then, like, is IVF something that is licit for an Orthodox Christian? Mm-hmm. Right? And we have certainly the Orthodox writer Michael Laffoon, who says that from an Orthodox perspective, every embryo is a human life whose existence may not be terminated at the whim of another human. And so if that's our starting point, right, then the question is, should Orthodox Christians engage in IVF at all? And basically the spectrum here ranges from, in terms of like the broader human spectrum, from ultra-conservative to very, 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 very conservative. You know, like, so although I have, you know, I've quoted the OCA, who has the most liberal stance that I'm aware of, is the very, I would still call it very, 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 very conservative, right? So the Moscow Patriarchate, typical for most Orthodox churches that have a position on record, just categorically forbids IVF. You know, because of the messy question of should we consider these zygotes to be these unimplanted zygotes to be persons or not. And the Moscow Patriarchate would say, you know, use other methods. You know, if other methods don't work, cross yourself and adopt a baby. You know, if you want to have children that badly, you know, or turn your sterility into a blessing. You know, you want to be truly a two-income family that can bless a local church. You want to be a two-income family that can drive certain social projects in your community. You know, like sometimes the things that seem like they're curses may actually be blessings. So that's what the Moscow Patriarchate would say to you. Now the OCA, on the other hand, in our extreme liberalism, is going to say that IVF is permissible between a married couple. No surrogacy here, right? But it stipulates that all embryos are destined to be returned to the wife. In other words, you can't create embryos and then throw them out. And again, I would say Gail Woloschak, who I don't remember if she lives in Pittsburgh or in Eastern Ohio, but she's an Orthodox biology PhD and bioethicist. She says she calls it the sacrifice of embryos, and she says that from an Orthodox Christian perspective, the sacrifice of embryos is unacceptable, right? With that being said, I mean, from the standpoint of our theology, do we know that should be classified as a person? We don't really have an answer to that. But given that we don't have a clear answer, the point is to err on the side of caution, not on the side of Kardashianism. Okay. And finally, actually I'll probably largely wrap up my presentation with this. IVF. So for Orthodox Christians, like I said, IVF is generally seen as objectionable in most circumstances. So surrogate mothers, designer children, embryo wastage are things that we're condemning, right? And sorry, like Kim Kardashian, who sometimes plays Armenian Orthodox occasionally when she feels like it. But like that surrogacy stuff we would say is morally wrong. Like that marriage bed belongs to you two and your two bodies, not to you two and some person you're hiring out and treating like an animal from Thailand or Ukraine or something. Anyway, then also, so the principle that emerges, as I said, is an embryo a person? But that embryos should be seen as persons in some respect. What does that mean for us in terms of the countless frozen embryos that now exist? Some people would say they should simply be discarded. Is that morally acceptable? I don't know. Anyway, possible hospice analogy there. So anyway, that's Orthodox Christianity and abortion in a nutshell. I mean, it's a pretty straight line there, right? I mean, we have a very hard position on this, and it's completely at odds with what's going on in sort of liberal Protestantism and much of American culture today. The end. Any final questions? Richard.
Why am I allowed to get communion if I had a career of dispensing contraceptives?
Well, let me read the
Not Plan B, regular contraceptives.
It's really interesting. Contraception is definitely seen. So the church has, I would say that rather than being like, you ever watch The Simpsons? Probably not, right?
Never.
Well, the wife in The Simpsons, has this kind of frown and kind of thing that she does. The church would view most uses of contraception as negative. But unlike abortion, which is seen as inherently evil, right? Contraception is seen as something that is usually evil. But it's not necessarily in and of itself. Actually, that's an interesting thing. It's not evil in and of itself. Because there are definitely legitimate, there are lots of Orthodox priests who bless various parishioners to use contraceptives. Most contraception that goes on in Orthodox families is not blessed by a priest. It's just done, right? It's just done. But there are lots of cases. I mean, I can think of people who have been given a blessing for reasons of mental health. You know, like the woman is like, oh my gosh, I have one baby and like I'm flipping out and I can't handle this, you know, and like there is actually like, so I know certainly of cases of blessing for contraception being given in the case of like in the case of like a woman who had like serious scarring in her uterus, you know, where the doctors, she's actually what Brandon is, nurse practitioner. So I mean, she's medical herself, you know, but her doctors told her, you know, like if you conceive again and bear your 6th child or something like that, she's got a lot of kids, you know, but if you conceive again, you will almost certainly die. And so there are definitely, you know, I would say one thing about contraception, I would say that is actually a place where an Orthodox Christian cannot act on his own authority, right? Like that's a place where you need to have a conversation with your parish priest about. But it's also something, Richard, the fact that a priest can bless that, right? Because like we just said, the Moscow Patriarchate, we can't bless abortion, you know. But the fact that we can bless and say, okay, you know, it seems like this is for your health, well-being, salvation, means that contraception is not inherently evil. It's just, you know. So I'll read the Moscow Patriarchate on the state if you'd like to hear it. So it's interesting because they kind of begin by acknowledging their own, I think, limitation here. So among the problems which need a religious and moral assessment is that of contraception. Some contraceptives have an abortive effect, interrupting artificially the life of the embryo on the very first stages of his life. Therefore, the same judgments are applicable to those to the use of them as to abortion. But other means, which do not involve interrupting an already conceived life, cannot be equated with abortion in the least. In defining their attitude to the non-abortive contraceptives, Christian spouses should remember that human reproduction is one of the principal purposes of the divinely established marital union. So this is one of the most important goals that you're looking to attain here. Why are you trying to contravene it? The deliberate refusal of childbirth on egoistic grounds devalues marriage and is a definite sin. At the same time, spouses are responsible before God for the comprehensive upbringing of their children.
It sounds like it's a gray area.
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess I could read. I'm like reading ahead. I'm just not sure, you know. Well, okay, fine. So spouses are responsible before God for the comprehensive upbringing of their children. One of the ways to be responsible for their birth is to restrain themselves from sexual relations for a time. However, Christian spouses should remember the words of St. Paul addressed to them: "Defraud ye not one the other, except it be with consent for a time, that ye may give yourselves to fasting and prayer, and come together again, that Satan tempt you not for your incontinency." Clearly, spouses should take such decisions mutually on the counsel of their spiritual father. And this, by the way, that also refers to like, you know, if, in the way they're addressing it, like if you wish to, for a time, refrain from sexual activity, you know, like for some religious end, right? That you should do this with the counsel of the spiritual father. The latter should take into account with pastoral prudence the concrete living conditions of the couple, their age, health, degree of spiritual maturity, and many other circumstances. In doing so, he should distinguish those who can hold the high demands of continence from those to whom it is not given, taking care above all that above all of the preservation and consolidation of the family.
You can stop reading.
Yeah, sorry. Also, they go on to say that that clergy are not allowed to coerce or induce their people to become celibates within their marriages. I mean, anyway, needs to be. Anyway, that's all right. So that's that.
Well, and I think
So I mean, I don't know. Okay, go ahead, Josie.
I think to like add to your question, Richard, and like feel free to call me out on this if I'm wrong, but like one of the tricky things with like hormonal birth control methods is that the mechanisms aren't always clear, right? Because oftentimes like they function by thickening uterine lining, which is theoretically supposed to prevent
Implantation.
fertilization from happening to begin with.
Oh, okay.
Because you're thickening the lining, so it makes it way harder for the sperm to get in there. But then, if that doesn't work, it also prevents implantation if you get to the point of fertilization.
Right.
Right. So.
My
yeah,
counsel on
that's-
this: beware pharmakia. You know, I mean, I think, you know, I would say, if I would have to talk to a bishop about probably anything more extreme than this, but like if so blessed by your priest, then you really need to be thinking about things that people tend not to like condoms, right? Like, I mean, they're very widespread, and judging from the trash around campus, they're widely used. But
Free in the hub most days.
what's that?
Free in the hub most days.
Ah!
Just saying.
Yikes.
So there aren't any pharmacists in heaven. Is that what you're
Well, Richard, make yourself the first one. No, I mean, I would say just given the, I mean, I think, you know, I mean, and I would say, all right, you know, for some legitimate reason, you know, you've been blessed to use birth control. I would say, you know, you need to adopt the asceticism of things like condoms. I would say. I mean, there may be something else. There's like meshes and stuff like that, maybe, or something like that. But I would think that would be. I mean, obviously, you could talk to the bishop, and the bishop could talk to Dr. Gail Woloshak or whoever, you know, and we could, you know, something can be discussed further. But
In my defense, I also dispense fertility medications. So I help God along.
he thinks he's going up, but actually, yeah. I mean, yeah, I think that is a tricky question.
Yes.
And again, I think too, one of the things we really need to encourage is just within the context of marriage, like, you know, unless there's some compelling reason, we should be trying to have children. Period. You know, that's just, you know. But that's another story for another time, probably.
The latest thing today is timing, and you mentioned it once. When is an unborn child a person? And the big thing now is the fetal heartbeat.
That's an attempt at this. You know, when's the quickening?
Yes.
When's the formation? You know,
Yes.
whatever.
The medical societies say that the so-called heartbeat at 5 weeks is not really a heartbeat. It's an amplification of the electrical impulses that are being generated in the fluid and in the structures. At 5 weeks, there are no heart chambers.
Right, heart per se, yeah.
Correct. So they're using the pro-abortion states that the impulses that you hear, 180 beats per minute, that's double a normal heart rate. That's not a heart rate. It's a manufactured manifestation of legitimizing abortions and or pro-life. But they do admit that the tube structure that the heart is going to be a heart. But pro-abortion disregards every aspect of timing. It's just blanket. It doesn't
Sure.
matter whether it's a tube generating electrical impulses that are interpreted as a heartbeat, or it's a 4-chamber heart at 90 beats per minute.
Sure.
So,
Well, and I think, again, our watchword goes back to Tertullian, that is a man which is going to be one. Like, that's the way we need to treat, if you leave this creature alone, it's going to become a human being. And that's just the way we need to kind of address it. But I think, you see with stuff like Roe v. Wade, you have this attempt to
dismiss all,
well, it's
question.
an attempt to, like, how do we you might say take seriously both sides, right? Or take not to take seriously, but take the interests of both potential angles into mind and forge a compromise, right? Because it is kind of like Augustine, although Augustine is not compromising on whether or not someone ought to abort, he says no. But even that forming of, like, is it a fetal heartbeat? Is it external viability? Is it like, so formed lungs and whatnot, and the ability to survive outside of the mother? Is it the formation of discernible